Plato's Cave Syndrome simplified why you resist the truth. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you believed to be true was just a shadow on the wall. That the world you thought you understood was nothing more than a projection, carefully crafted to keep you from seeing the real thing. Sounds like something out of the Matrix, right? But this idea isn't new. Over 2,000 years ago, Plato described a scenario just like this, what we now call the allegory of the cave. But here's the real mind-bender. His story isn't just an ancient thought experiment. It's about us, right now, this very moment. Plato's cave syndrome isn't just a metaphor, it's a condition we all suffer from in some way. It's that feeling that there's something more, but we can't quite grasp it. It's the unsettling realization that maybe, just maybe, we've been conditioned to accept a version of reality that isn't the full picture. And once we start questioning it, everything changes. But why is it so hard to break free? Why do most people stay in the cave, convinced that the shadows are all there is? Let's break it down. Imagine a group of people who have been trapped in a cave since birth. They're chained in place, facing a wall, unable to turn their heads. Behind them, a fire burns, and between the fire and the prisoners, there's a walkway where people carry objects, statues, animals, everyday things. The prisoners can't see the real objects, only their shadows cast on the wall in front of them. And because they've never known anything else, they believe these shadows are reality. They talk about them, name them, assign meaning to them. To them, the world is nothing more than flickering silhouettes. But here's where things get interesting. One day, a prisoner is freed. He turns around and sees the fire. At first, it blinds him. His eyes hurt. The light is overwhelming. He stumbles, confused, unable to process what he's seeing. The shadows were so much simpler, so much easier to understand. But as his eyes adjust, he realizes something shocking. What he thought was real was just a dim reflection of something greater. And then he is led out of the cave. Now, imagine stepping outside for the first time after a lifetime in darkness. The sun burns your eyes. The real world is overwhelming colors, depth, complexity. It's too much at first, but slowly you begin to see. You begin to understand. You realize that everything you once believed was just an illusion. And with this new awareness comes a responsibility. You have to go back. You have to tell the others. But here's the tragic part of Plato's story. When the freed prisoner returns to the cave, the others don't believe him. They laugh. They say he's lost his mind. His eyes, now adjusted to the light, struggle to see in the darkness, making him look weak, confused. And in their fear, in their resistance to the unknown, they reject him. They would rather cling to the familiar, to the comfortable certainty of their shadows, than face the terrifying possibility that their entire understanding of reality is wrong.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Now, let's bring this into our world. Every single day, we live inside caves of our own making. Some of them are built by society, media, culture, education systems that shape what we think is possible, what we think is normal. Others are more personal beliefs we've carried since childhood, fears that keep us from questioning, from exploring, from seeking truth. And the scariest part, most of us don't even realize we're in a cave. We think we're seeing the full picture when, in reality, we're only looking at shadows. But here's the real question. If you had the chance to leave your cave, would you take it? And if you did, would you have the courage to go back and wake others up, knowing they might reject you? The comfort of shadows, why we resist the truth, even when it's right in front of us. There's something strangely comforting about the familiar, even when it limits us. The prisoners in Plato's cave weren't just physically restrained, they were mentally conditioned. But to them, the shadows weren't just images on a wall, they were reality itself. And when people believe they already know the truth, they stop looking for it. This is why breaking free is so difficult. It's not just about discovering something new, it's about unlearning everything we once believed to be certain. And that is terrifying. Think about how hard it is to change a deeply held belief. Not just a casual opinion, but something fundamental to how you see the world. Maybe it's a political ideology, a religious belief, or even your perception of yourself. When new information challenges it, what happens? Do you immediately accept the truth, or do you resist? Do you feel defensive, uncomfortable, maybe even angry? That reaction isn't random, it's biological. Our brains are wired to protect us from uncertainty. It's called cognitive dissonance, and it's the reason why people will fight to defend a false belief, even when presented with overwhelming evidence against it. Now, apply this to the real world. Imagine someone who has spent their entire life believing one version of history, only to find out that much of what they were taught was incomplete or even manipulated. Imagine someone who has always trusted an authority figure, only to discover that person was lying to them. Imagine realizing that the system you've spent years defending, the rules you've followed, the social norms you've accepted were never designed to benefit you in the first place. What do you do with that knowledge? Do you embrace it, or do you retreat into denial? Most people retreat, not because they are incapable of understanding the truth, but because the truth demands something from them. If you accept that the world is not what you thought it was, then you have to change how you live in it. And change is painful. It requires effort. It requires re-evaluating everything. And for many, the cost of waking up seems higher than the cost of staying asleep. This is why, when the freed prisoner returns to the cave to tell the others what he has seen, they don't celebrate his enlightenment. They don't ask questions. They don't say, "Tell us more." Instead, they mock him. They call him crazy. They dismiss him. And if he pushes too hard, if he insists that they must leave the cave, they may even turn violent. Because in their minds, he is not offering them freedom, he is threatening their entire way of life. Look around, and you'll see this pattern everywhere. Throughout history, the people who challenged the status quo, who questioned authority, who pointed out uncomfortable truths, were almost always met with resistance. Socrates, the very philosopher who gave us this allegory, was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth with new ideas. Galileo was persecuted for proving that the Earth was not the center of the universe. The visionaries, whistleblowers, revolutionaries time and time again, those who step out of the cave and try to bring others with them are met with hostility. And yet, some people still choose to leave. Some people still choose to seek the truth, no matter how painful it is. Why? What makes them different? Is it intelligence? Curiosity? Luck? Or is it something deeper, an unwillingness to live in ignorance once they've glimpsed something more? This brings us to the most important question yet. If you were in the cave, and someone told you there was more to reality than what you could see, would you listen? Or would you laugh, turn away, and cling to the comfort of your shadows? With the burden of awareness, why seeing the truth can feel like a curse, there's a moment after waking up when everything feels worse. not better. You would think that stepping out of the cave, seeing the real world for the first time, would bring nothing but clarity and liberation. But in reality, enlightenment is heavy. It's disorienting. It forces you to confront the uncomfortable fact that much of what you once believed was an illusion. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. That's the real burden of awareness, not just recognizing the truth, but realizing that you can never go back to the way things were. But imagine spending your whole life believing in a system that promised security, success, and meaning. That maybe it's the idea that if you just work hard enough, you'll be rewarded. Or that the people in power always have your best interests at heart. Or that happiness is something you can achieve through external validation, wealth, or status. These beliefs are comforting. They give a structure. They make the world feel predictable. But what happens when you realize they aren't entirely true? What happens when you see that the game is rigged, that the system benefits a few while keeping the majority trapped? The happiness isn't something you can buy or earn like a prize. That moment of realization isn't freeing, it's terrifying. Because if the foundation you've built your life on starts to crumble, what's left? This is why many people, even after glimpsing the truth, choose to turn away. They rationalize. They convince themselves that maybe they're overthinking it, that maybe ignorance really is bliss. And in some ways they're right. Life inside the cave is simpler. It requires fewer questions, fewer struggles, fewer existential crises. But is that really living? If you had the choice between a comfortable illusion and a painful truth, which would you choose? This dilemma explains why people who challenge widely accepted norms often feel alienated. When you begin to see beyond the surface, whether it's questioning mainstream narratives, breaking free from toxic patterns, or realizing that societal expectations don't necessarily lead to fulfillment, you quickly learn that not everyone wants to hear it. Friends might distance themselves. Conversations become harder. You start to feel like an outsider, speaking a language that others don't understand or refuse to acknowledge. And that isolation can make you wonder, was it worth it? Was waking up really the right choice? But here's the paradox: once you've seen the truth, staying in the illusion becomes unbearable. Even if it means facing discomfort, even if it means losing the sense of belonging you once had, you know that returning to the cave isn't an option. And that's when the real transformation begins. Because now, instead of being a prisoner of the shadows, you have a chance to shape your own reality, and to build a life based on what is real, not what is convenient. But that raises another question: what do you do with this knowledge? Do you keep it to yourself, quietly navigating the world with your newfound awareness? Or do you try to wake others up, knowing full well that many will resist, reject, or even resent you for it? The price of truth: why awakening is only the beginning. Once you step outside the cave, once you see reality as it truly is, something profound happens. You realize that truth is not just something you passively receive. It's something you have to continuously seek. The moment you wake up is not the end of the journey, it is the beginning of a much harder path. Because knowing the truth is one thing, but living by it, that's where the real challenge begins. Many people think that once they wake up, they will feel a sense of peace, a kind of superiority over those still trapped in illusion. But in reality, awakening often brings more struggle than comfort. You start seeing contradictions everywhere: how people say they want the truth, but reject it when it threatens their beliefs. How systems claim to be built on justice, yet perpetuate inequality. how society rewards conformity while claiming to value individuality. You begin to notice how deeply people cling to their illusions, not because they are foolish, but because those illusions make life bearable. And then comes the hardest realization of all: there was a time when you were one of them. This moment of self-awareness is crucial. It humbles you. It reminds you that no one is born outside the cave. We all start in chains, shaped by forces beyond our control: our upbringing, our culture, our education, our fears. And just as you once resisted uncomfortable truths, others will resist when you try to show them what you have seen. This is why so many who awaken struggle with loneliness. Because once you step outside of the illusion, you can never fully return to the world as it was. Conversations that once seemed deep now feel shallow. The goals you once pursued now seem meaningless. The things that used to excite you no longer hold the same appeal. And the people around you, many of them will not understand what has changed. Some will even resent you for changing. But here's where most people misunderstand Plato's allegory. The story isn't just about escaping the cave. It's about what happens next. The freed prisoner doesn't stay in the light, basking in his newfound awareness. He goes back. He returns to the cave, not because he misses it, but because he feels a responsibility to help others see what he has seen. And this is where the greatest test of all begins. Because when you return, you realize something painful. Most people do not want to be freed. They do not want to see the fire behind them, let alone step outside into the overwhelming brightness of reality. They will defend the shadows on the wall. They will call you misguided, arrogant, or even dangerous. They will cling to the comfort of their illusions, not because they are incapable of seeing the truth, but because doing so would require them to change. And change is terrifying. So what do? Do you keep pushing, trying to force others to see what they are not ready to see? Do you leave them behind, deciding that the struggle isn't worth it? Or do you take a different approach, one that is neither forceful nor indifferent, but patient and strategic? This is where wisdom comes in. Awakening is not about proving others wrong. It is not about feeling superior because you see what they do not. True wisdom is understanding that people awaken in their own time, in their own way. Some will never leave the cave, and that is not your failure. Your role is not to drag them into the light, it is to be a light. To live in such a way that those who are ready to see will notice, will question, will begin their own journey out of the darkness. And that is the final message of Plato's cave syndrome. The truth is not something you impose on others. It is something you embody. It is something you seek again and again, knowing that every time you think you have reached full understanding, there is still more to learn. Because in the end, the real cave is not just the one we escape from, it is the one we must constantly resist falling back into. So the question remains, now that you have seen the light, what will you do with it?